So I would like to thank everyone for being here today. I'll be the chair. I'm Dean Schaefer. So the event is Illiberalism and Social Policy, a four-country comparison. And so this event is being hosted by the CEU Democracy Institute. The research is connected with the AUTHLIB project, which is short for Neo-Authoritarianisms in Europe and the Liberal Democratic Response. It's very important work. And so I want to thank our presenter, Dorota Sikra. She is a research fellow at the CEU Democracy Institute, a visiting professor at CEU's Department of Gender Studies, and the head of the department at the Center for Social Sciences. Sikra is her main research field is the welfare state and family policy development in Central and Eastern Europe. I'd also like to thank our Eva Foto for agreeing to discuss. Eva is a professor at CEU in the Department of Gender Studies. She's also a research fellow at CEU Democracy Institute. And Eva's work is interested in how and why gender differences in the labor market and elsewhere are shaped, reshaped, renegotiated, and reproduced in different types of societies and different social contexts. So I would like to thank all of our attendees who are here in person and also online. We'll give Dorota about 20 minutes or so to present, and then Eva will get the conversation started with about 10 minutes, 15 minutes of comments. And then we'll open the floor to Q&A. So if you're watching online, you can put your comments either in the Q&A questions, or there's also a chat function. I'll be following both of those, and I'll share them with our presenters during the Q&A session. So to start off with, Dorota?
Let me share the screen now.
Okay.
That's right.
Yes.
So this research is part of the AUTHLIB project, and which had a working package on policies more generally. And my research focused on social policies in four countries that experienced for a shorter or a much longer period of time of illiberal rule. Let me start with a little bit, but I will really rush through this because not only because most of you would be very knowledgeable or more knowledgeable than me about these definitions of democracy, but we certainly need to define illiberalism for our purposes, for the purposes of this research. So we start from a minimalist definition of democracy, which is the free and fair elections, whereas in liberal democracies, to put it very simple, we also have constitutional checks and balances and various protection of the individuals and organizations from the arbitrary actions of the state itself. In illiberal democracies, we usually say that the core of democracy is still there, although we can question whether those elections are still free and fair. But certainly the separation of power and the independence and freedom of press and civil society is severely curtailed. In this project, we are not only looking at illiberal democracies or autocratizing states like Hungary in our case, but also to illiberal actors within democracies, within liberal democracies. And that's what makes this project very special. And also this provides a new field of research for myself, who formerly only looked into autocratizing states. What is important for policy purposes is that in these third wave autocratizing countries, like also Turkey, or to take another example from Asia, India under Modi, we see that autocratizers find it very important to keep the facade of democracy. So they still have elections, although those are really distorted, but because they have elections and because they primarily don't use coercive power to get and remain in power, they use policies, and primarily economic and social policies, to maintain or increase their popularities, and also to build up legitimacy under the decline of democracy. So this is why economic and social policies are so important for illiberal actors, also more generally. Now, how illiberalism is defined in this project is the following. These actors, whether within democratic context or outside of it, are opposed to the underlying, the most important premises that I just described of liberal democracy. They are against, from time to time, not always and not all of them, against the following basic values of liberal democracy: the equality of human rights and the pluralism of lifestyles, checks and balances and the control of executive, the protection of property and privacy by privacy protection from the state intrusion, the neutrality of the state, the protection of minority rights, and the acceptance of non-majoritarian lifestyles. From all this, what I would like to just draw the attention to the non-neutrality of the state, which is so important for social policy. So when we see after so many years of dominantly liberal or even neoliberal economic and social policies in many, many countries, including Eastern European countries, we now see an activation, an activating state, or an active interventionist state, or interventionist ideas by those who question liberal democracy, by these illiberal actors. I will just point out here when I talk about the relationship between democratic values, democracy, and welfare, that there are two opposing camps, opposing arguments here, and there is some discussion in the literature, new emerging discussion of the literature, which did not come to a conclusion about this, about the issue, whether democracy actually helps the welfare state and promotes social rights and democracy, and then it would mean that de-democratizing processes would have a negative, a bad impact on social policies and social rights. Whereas there is the other argument, which points out that we know many historical examples, and now even current day examples of autocratizers promoting welfare and the extension of social policies. An important side note maybe here is that, as opposed to social rights, in such actors rather promote a paternalistic connection between the state and citizens, thus some kind of a gift relationship, as Ferge put it in the early 1990s. This is what we already know about illiberalism and welfare. So before the start of this project, we already had important papers pointing out, important scholarship pointing out the impact of neoliberal austerity policies on the rise of illiberal and populist power. And also, newer research pointed out that illiberalism and populism plays out mainly in the procedures and the discourses of policies rather than their content. Their content, by content, we mean the ideological direction of reforms, meaning that whether they are, for instance, equalizing or rather promoting inequalities, and more generally, what ways they think, illiberal actors think that the good society should be led. So what kind of policies lead to the so-called, what they think would be the good society. So that's rather diverse in populist and illiberal, among populist and illiberal actors. And here I will not differentiate between populism and illiberalism, although I know that there is a lot of difference, but we don't have time to go into that. What we also tend to know by now is that they promote a dualistic approach, a dualism between deservingness and undeservingness. And what we already also see, not least by Eva's contribution, is that they have a peculiar relationship with their female constituencies, and there is an increasing turn towards women by illiberal actors. Now, my research questions were in this research: what kind of social policies do illiberal actors pursue? What do they do when they are in power, as opposed to when they are just promising? Are their social policy reforms popular? And whether there is an illiberal style of policy making. The chosen countries were Austria, Italy, Hungary, and Poland. These represent three welfare regime types. Austria is a typical conservative welfare regime, whereas Italy is a Southern European, and Poland and Hungary belong to the rather mixed type of Eastern European welfare regimes. This is a qualitative analysis, mainly of party manifestos and also of policy documents, social policy documents, when we see reforms happening. This is a critical analysis in that it looks into inclusionary and exclusionary processes, inequalities, and what the policy's impact on these, although of course I have limited room to discuss that. And I also have an interpretive approach in this paper, which means that I want to know I'm curious about what values are behind the policies. What do we see any consistency of values, and if yes, what is that? This is still research in progress, so this is the first presentation really, and I'm really looking forward to your comments. I'm not going into these specific questions now, but I want to emphasize that in the case of Italy and also Austria, I got really great help from native-speaking students of the CEU who helped me dig into those texts. So let's jump into what these actors do. In Italy, we looked into the brothers of Italy, Lega Nord and Silvio Berlusconi's social policy promises through their manifestos. And the most important thing I want to say here is that these three actors or parties, Berlusconi having various parties, have a rather consistent social policy, which is not changing a lot over the decades, actually. And they're very much in alignment to each other. So we don't see big differences between them. They all want to increase employment, especially of young and mothers, which is important in terms of gender. So they don't want to keep mothers at home. They propose tax cuts and more generally fiscal social policy. They are into early retirement, especially for women, which is called opzione donna in the case of fraternity, which they actually promised for their term on power. And they promote social assistance for those who are truly in need. That means that they want to exclude certain groups of population, but it's not that clear who is really in need and who is not. They all promote pro-natalist family policies, especially through taxes and special grants. when fraternity got into power in 2022, they, or even before that, Meloni made very strong statements about deservingness and undeservingness. She said, among others, that we are convinced that a just state, here you see the value, what is justice according to Meloni, that a just state does not put on the same level of assistance those that can work and those that cannot, those that need assistance and those that need a job. We want to distinguish these two aspects. So accordingly, the deserving group here are the elderly, those people living with disabilities, families with low income, and children, individuals over 60. So really the traditional deserving groups that we know from the end of 19th century, actually. And the others would be those undeserving, who are unemployed by their own choice. So this is what we see from the manifestos. So what did Meloni do when she got into power? Immediately, in a very illiberal way, she stopped the citizenship income that was formerly put into place by the Five Stars left-wing party, which gave a certain amount of income to everyone, actually, meaning that it is, of course, defined who receives it, but without there any requirement. Citizens received that money since 2019, I believe. And then made it into a fragmented social assistance program with a maximum length of 7 months. With the exception of families with small children, disabled individuals, so the deserving can actually receive the benefit for much longer period of time. Just one other example for the young people. For young people, those who did not finish school, they have to finish school to receive this money. And various other requirements, like, for instance, acceptance of the first job offer, are there for those who are unemployed by their own choice. So this is a selectivist approach that is very strongly based on deservingness. Let's move to Austria, where FPÖ has a long history of social policies. Actually, this party shifted for rather liberal economic policies and economic ideology towards a more welfarist view through the 2010s. But consistently, they were against immigration. So the most important statement here, that Austria is not a country for immigration, but very peculiarly, they at the same time promote not a selectivist, but rather a universalist approach in social policies. So they promote a universal welfare state for all native Austrians, a really generous one, whereas an exclusion for everyone else. So between 2000 and 2007, the first period of FPÖ power, when they ruled, actually both times they ruled with the Austria's People's Party, they united the social insurance system, but at the same time excluded immigrants. This was a really great paradigmatic reform that modernized and equalized the social insurance system between classes and also occupations. But at the same time, it decreased the social rights of non-native citizens. In its second, more recent term on power, they further restructured and unified the social security system and simplified it They put a big emphasis on increasing pensions. So again, they universalize and equalize the Austrian welfare system, but here now very sharply excluded immigrants with the legislation of requiring the knowledge of German language for all social insurance benefits. It's so interesting, actually, when you browse the web and try to find rules, for instance, related to parental leave or maternity leave, you will not find it in any other language than German. So, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But so they really put it in practice. Now, I'd like to talk just shortly about Fidesz, because most of the audience would know a lot about its social policies. Maybe starting with the nationalization of pension system that Fidesz promised because before they got to power, and more generally, they had a welfareist agenda, initiating also a social referenda before they got to power. And that actually helped them to get to power. So against austerity under crisis. They stopped early retirement and disability pensions, so excluded vulnerable groups from social insurance. But at the same time, in the same system, they treated women preferentially with early retirement. So already at the early years, we saw a special turn towards female constituencies. The leading idea here is the work-based society that we can see everywhere in all subfields of social policy, that is served not least by the flat personal income tax system. The more you earn, the more you should get from the state. That's the idea of Fidesz. Fidesz had two flagship programs. One of them was family policy that was supposed to kind of unite the nation and is actually popular among the masses, whether pro or anti-Fidesz voters, and public works that serves the poorer social strata, so to say. And what we also see emerging here very strongly, stronger than anywhere else actually in the world currently, is the so-called social policy by other means. That means that not to promote welfare or to provide welfare not through traditional redistribution and cash transfers, but by special loans and taxes and grants. So overall, Fidesz strengthens social rights for those in stable employment, at the same time provided selective and very disciplining assistance for the so-called non-working poor. And of course, we can talk a lot about the gender aspects, but I will skip that now and turn back and in the end. Well, PiS in Poland was on par, of course, for a shorter period, and also had a welfareist approach and welfareist promises, which they also lived up to. But at the same time, they had a universalizing approach to social policy, with their flagship program 500 plus that many of you know already, provided formerly unseen amounts without any requirements to all Polish families. At the same time, PiS decreased the pension age, which is a very peculiar move and unprecedented in whole Europe. So PiS was really strict then with the abortion rights, further strictened, nearly eliminated abortion rights, whereas Fidesz did not. What is common with the two parties, and we don't see that in Italy and Austria, is the very harsh anti-LGBTQ campaigns, and also some local policies in Poland and central state policies in Hungary. Now, what are the commonalities? And I then get to my conclusions between all these parties. We may see that most of them place performance in the center of social policy, of social policies, how to gain social rights that is linked to various types of performances. It could be work, but also women are targeted not only as workers, but also as mothers and carers. There is a strong anti-immigration element to all these exclusive social policies, but at the same time, social policy by other means is particularly important for all these parties, but especially for that. Interestingly, we don't see very strong religious traits in the programs of these parties in social policy. I have long tables which you will receive. It will, I think my PowerPoint can be uploaded to the side of DI, so I will not go into that. Rather say a word on the narratives related to social policy, where we see that nativism and anti-immigration is very strongly featuring everywhere. Hardworking people are there, but we cannot imagine a hardworking immigrant. They cannot imagine a hardworking immigrant. So both are important at the same time. They also imagine the natural family to be promoted, and mothers and women are strongly in the center. Now, what are the ways forward? And my questions also to you, to the audience, you can help me better this research. Whether to include more illiberal actors from these parties, like Jobbik in Hungary. I could not yet compare or bring in the theme of welfare regimes, whether they make any difference or whether there is a shift in these regimes. Time matters awfully, and I couldn't account for that because in the 2000s, 2010s, and 20s, there are very different policies in every country and in every country, because we live in different worlds. I also have this question whether we can include discourses together with policies, and if yes, how? And I couldn't yet account for which social groups are actually what are the social groups that are attracted most by these policies. So what is the change in the constituencies of these actors? So how do constituencies of illiberal actors change, and whether there are class coalitions or any kind of coalitions among these actors? That's a really intriguing, very interesting question to delve into later. Thank you so much for the attention. And sorry if I was a little longer than.
It was good. You were good on time. All right, so thank you, Dorcha, so much. I look forward to the discussion that will follow. Eva, do you want to go ahead and get your PowerPoint ready? And so while Eva is doing that, I will go ahead and encourage the audience online. If you have any questions that came to your mind while Dorcha was presenting, go ahead and share them either in the Q&A or in the chat. I'm following both, and so I can take those questions and I'll share them after Eva gives her discussion points.
Thank you. Thanks.
And now the floor belongs to Eva.
I almost took us offline, but I didn't. Thank you, Zorka, for this paper and doing this research. And I apologize for not contributing my part, which I should have, but I thought I would now. So I really enjoyed the paper. This is really exciting to see, to try and figure out if there is any similarity in the
policy regimes of these countries, because you sort of feel that there's something similar, but when you actually look, you feel that there's some similarity. There's some similarity in the atmosphere, but when you look closer, it turns out that there are lots of differences. So I thought I was really excited to see especially the last part of the paper that shows the common threads. This nativist anti-migrant sentiment, which is everywhere really, both in explicit and in implicit format. Also, the mixture. So, in the provision of welfare, the appearance of these non-state actors, or these novel types of welfare promotion methods. What do you call them? Non-state methods or non-state tools. And that all of these policies, or many of these policies, many of these illiberal actors target specific groups defined as the deserving poor, that this differentiation is made, and these people are stable working class or lower middle class up, people who live, but not enough to be, but it's not enough, it's not just a class status, but it has to be also a status, sort of a family status, who live in heterosexual society with families. And as I was reading through the paper, what was also very obvious was that the concept of gender and gender equality. I mean, you talk about women, but gender inequality, gender relations are implicated in every one of these aspects in different ways. So I thought I would, instead of critiquing or answering any of the questions that you raised, because I can't answer them, but instead of answering them, I thought maybe I should add the gender, this whole thing that I should have written about gender and policies related to gender. Because if you really think about it, the approach of these illiberal actors to the concept of gender is really one of the pillars of this regime. This their approach to gender in and of itself makes them illiberal. They have the way they think about gender relations itself produces the illiberal nature of the regime, because they typically question equality between men and women. They typically question specific rights that women might have, and they're extremely so typically sort of social rights and human rights that people have. So that is sort of they have an illiberal approach to gender relations and sexuality, which is built into every single policy that they pass. And there are some explicit policies that are linked to that. So let's so what I mean, this, of course, I have a few. I've put together the slides mostly to entertain you and to show you a few pictures, but this is clearly my favorite. I'm sure that Orban created this to help gender scholars use this as an example, because not only it exists not only in Hungarian but also in English. This is one of his major posters in which he announced his political program. So to show that gender is really implicated is really one of the pillars of the regime, and it is a way to show its illiberalism. It is indicative of its approach is indicative of illiberalism. So what about gender? What kind of policies, or how do we create some order in these policies? I'm trying to do this on two computers, and I thought we could look at 5 different areas where the notion of gender comes up, and where policies are created that address more explicitly the concept of gender, gender relations, and gender inequality. Those are the 3 things, and sexuality. Those are the 4 things that I'm talking about. So the concept of gender and gender ideology. Then all of these regimes have policies about gender equality at work, or if they don't, that in and of itself is a policy measure. They all have policies related to LGBTQ rights. And then there's special attention given to gender rights and the concept of malleability of gender, whether or not it is malleable or not, and then reproductive rights. So in those 5 areas, at least, there are explicit policies and explicit political discourse. It's difficult to to separate actual policies and political discourse, because of course, when you are in power, you can introduce policies. When you're not in power, you can promise, you can push policy proposals, but how many of those you will be realizing, of course, depends on a number of other things. But so let's go through these one by one, and I have a few illustrative quotes from political speeches. And I included Brazil as well, because I find it fascinating how Bolsonaro's discourse is so similar to what we're encountering here. So the first point was about the concept of gender and gender ideology. In all of these countries, we encounter this idea that the quote from Strache it describes it very well. Gender madness is taking place today. The argument that the concept of gender is culturally different from our own understanding of men and women, that this is something that's imposed on us, either by a leftist conspiracy or by the European Union, or you name it, somebody. Also that it is this whole notion about gender is against common sense, against, this is a populist notion, like regular people's common sense, that this is a dangerous trend, and also in many East European countries that this is a sign of Western decline. So if you look at Kaczynski, they are also trying to impose on us issues of a moral nature. He means sort of gender. They want solutions to be adopted that are, one might say, lacking reasonable thinking. He's talking about gender policy. So again, the reasonableness. Orban said it so many times that that this is strange. These are odd people who have these weird ideas, and contrast it to us commonsensical Hungarians. And Bolsonaro says something very similar. During the last decade, we have allowed ourselves to be seduced unwittingly by ideological systems of thought that thought not truth, but absolute power. So you see here, this is, of course, he can't claim that it's Brussels or the European Union, but he claims this sort of a vague conspiracy theory of leftist whoever, some ideology that took root in the areas of culture, education, ideology, invading our homes to, to attack the society, healthy family, just trying to destroy our children's innocence, perverting their most basic elementary identity, the biological one. Okay, so so this whole concept of gender comes up. It is constructed as a threat, as something that these heroic leaders are fighting against. So it has an important political use from the point of view of I mean, several people have described how this is a classic strategy, political strategy of illiberal rulers to create a threat and then pretend that they're defending the population. And this is the principle. So this is the whole concept of gender that's built into then the rest of the general policies, but it is important in and of itself. Okay, so that's one thing about gender. There are policies, I mean, there are not explicit policies that address this whole gender madness as such, but then there are other policies which I will now describe, which is connected to that. So the second point on my list of 5 was gender inequality, or gender equality in paid and unpaid work. This in Europe, in the context of a number of legislation that have been passed in the past 10 years by the European Union, encouraging equality, the promotion of promoting equality in the workplace. These policy actors in Italy, Hungary, Austria, and elsewhere have introduced a variety of policies and not introduced a variety of policies. Both of those are important, that has an impact on gender equality. First of all, they all encourage women's paid work, and in that sense, this is different. I mean, Austria and Italy, this is certainly, I mean, it's not new, but it's certainly relatively new. In Hungary and Poland, it isn't. But they also, many of them, especially the ones in Eastern Europe, the ones that have been in power for longer, managed to eliminate practically all institutions that support gender equality. So that elimination itself is a policy move. Many of them refuse to implement European Union directives, which is about the title, or the roadmaps on gender equality, etc. Yes, and many of them refuse to include or introduce work-life balance measures at the level of companies and the state. The kind of work-life balance that would create more equality in the workplace. And now I kind of lost this one on my computer, but never mind. Okay, so while all of these actors seem to promote work for women, but they certainly do not promote equality at work, and in fact describe women as not having the same kind of ambitions and pass policies on that principle. So here's Kaczynski. I really am a sincere supporter of women's equality. I mean, they all claim that, but I am not in, or at least they claim to like women. But I'm not in favor of women pretending to be men, as Fidesz said in one of its first conferences when Viktor Orbán was asked in, I don't know, 1990, what the party's position is about women. He looked around and, by some international American journalists, he looked around and said, well, we like women. So this is, it kind of got stuck there. A big supporter of women's equality, but I'm not in favor of women pretending to be men and men pretending to be women, because that is something completely different. Meloni, who, of course, it's difficult for her to not support gender equality, says that women should not be competing, there shouldn't be a competition between men and women. This is something that was echoed by Hungary's failed president in one of her videos. So this is a recurring theme, and the policy measures or lack of policy measures echo this. The third issue is sexuality, and emphasis on heteronormativity, especially, and this is true especially in Central and Eastern European countries. So even though you're not criminalized if you engage in non-heterosexual behavior, but but of course, sex education in schools is questioned or eliminated. Same-sex marriage does not exist, only in Austria. In the other three countries, it doesn't. And reproductive rights for same-sex couples, adoption rights in same-sex couples do not exist in Hungary and Poland. They do in Austria and Hungary. Here, there's a split between East and West, which is also interesting in and of itself. But in terms of speech and discourse, there's not a huge difference. That's why I put in a quote from Strache, who says that as the Freedom Party, we will stand by the traditional marriage between women and men without wanting to discriminate against homosexuals. There's always that claim of non-discrimination. The Constitutional Court made a decision here. You can't do much about it, even if you're not happy with the development. But we must protect the family and children from being harassed about sexual preferences and practices as early as kindergarten and elementary school. Again, here you see the element of danger and the fact that children are always involved in this discourse. But those are the areas of policymaking. So sex education in school has been banned in Hungary. The Marriage Act has been changed in Hungary and in Poland as well. Maybe it will be changed back now. And adoption and reproductive rights are also addressed on a policy level. Here's Orbán: homosexuals can do what they want, but they cannot enter into a marriage recognized by the state. Same-sex couples should not be raising our children. You see the othering, and you see how the emphasis on children. And there's another one about Bolsonaro, even more energetic. Anyway, so sexuality is a second area where a lot of policy has been passed. And then trans rights are, Zorka, can you move that, because I can't read that out. Trans rights are kind of out of the question in the two Central and East European countries, but there's a lot of discourse about it elsewhere, which is why I put in a quote from Meloni: masculine and feminine are rooted in bodies, and it is an incontrovertible act. Still, in Italy, you can in fact change your gender legally still, and in Austria too, but not in Hungary or in Poland, although something I think is being no, that's not what's being backtracked right now. But in any case, so if if Meloni would have her way, she may be pushing in that direction. So we need to explain why there's this difference between East and West. It's either because Orbán's been in power for longer, and Kaczynski also had quite a long stretch of power, but or because of the history of these countries that allows that is more favorable to these views. But anyway, there's certainly in Hungary too, and in Poland, there's been some policy making that prevents people to change their genders. So that's another area. And finally, reproductive rights. In every one of these countries, the state expresses a strong interest in controlling reproduction in different ways. And Zorka already talked about family policies, and you know that that's an obsession of mine, so I'm not going to talk about it now. But there are other ways in which the state wants to control reproduction, and that's through abortion rights, and also a control of reproductive technologies and a ban or promotion of surrogacy. And you see that opinions differ, but everywhere, even so, obviously it's only in Poland that abortion is banned, but in the other 3 countries too, you know, there are limitations, and there's an ongoing questioning in Hungary too of abortion rights. There's sort of a danger of abortion rights. Marine Le Pen again cannot very well question abortion rights. That I think would be very politically problematic for her, but she still said that I'm attached to this right. I've said so. Whereas in the moment I chair, there are many personalities and members who are resolutely against it. So she acknowledges that this is a struggle for her. I was very clear in the internal competition I conducted before my election. I guess I'm not in favor of calling abortion into question, but I do say that there are drips and abuses. So even she would say, well, people sometimes abuse abortion rights, so maybe there's some limitations that have to go put in there. And of course, surrogacy is another issue that's being questioned, partially because it's connected to non-heterosexual couples. So overall, I think there seems to be a slight disconnect between what they say and what they do. Because, and this is, I already raised this, it's unclear whether or not this is because they haven't been able to realize these goals before, until now, or because there's some resistance in the country that would not allow the banning of non-heterosexual marriages, but or because of the traditions or histories of the countries. But certainly there's more policies that actually have been introduced in Eastern Europe, but the other countries too echo the sentiments. So there's a desire, there seems to be a political desire to introduce those policies connected to gender. So, and I was just basically arguing that in political discourse, gender is used. So when they talk, gender is used as a tool for claiming political legitimacy, the moral superiority, moral righteousness, common sense, to appropriate the position of common sense, and also victimhood, victimization by an alien, or an enemy, Brussels, or somebody else, some vague alien force out there. And in policy making, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, gender and sexuality is used to exclude certain groups from citizenship rights. Again, this is true in parental or in family policies as well, but there's a strong emphasis on heterosexual families. So anybody who does not belong or does not live in such a coupling is excluded. And to shift the unit of welfare attention, the attention of welfare of policies to families rather than to individuals, and to carve out a specific and typically vulnerable position for women in this precarious society. So again, to differentiate between men and women, but differentiate in a way that assigns specific roles and values and characters to women. And even though acknowledging women's usefulness, in fact, even valuing different kinds of contributions that women could provide, but valuing it and supporting it in ways that still leaves women more vulnerable than men. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eva.
Stop sharing.
You were right that that your presentation makes a great contribution to Dortche's paper. So we have about 40 minutes for Q&A, but before we open up, I would like to ask Dortche if she has a response to anything that Eva said.
This is what I should have written when
I'm so happy. I'm so happy it's happening finally. Yeah, it's really great. Wonderful contribution, and yeah, we probably need to talk more about it and how maybe in other social policy areas gender plays out, and how or we could emphasize more the gender equality aspect. I'm sure it's hidden in many other social policy related policies, social policy related discourses, and in the policies themselves. There was one thing I wanted to react about. Oh yeah, Maloney's. I just didn't have time to show that, but besides this legislation that eliminated the social income, one of her first moves were to stop
Servicing.
yeah, servicing, yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah. So, and because she said that, you know, to stop the possibility for another woman to bear your child. Why? It was reasoned for protecting these vulnerable women. But in fact, it is seen in Italy as an act against heterosexual, homosexual, non-heterosexual people having children. But that's, you know, that's again such an interesting policy that deeply includes gender in actually at least two ways.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, both of you. So we have a few questions online, but we can kind of go back and forth between in person and online. Maybe we'll start if any of you have questions here. Yes, okay.
Thank you so much, and thank you for thinking together. So I look forward to what comes out of the process. I have a comment to Eva's typology, the 5 that you had, and I had one question about violence.
yeah.
Why is that not among the
It
5?
was, but I just didn't realize that you're going to be here and decided that I certainly don't know enough about it to even open my mouth.
You have seen me, you remember the violence. Why not put heterosexual or sexuality point and trans point together? Because they're both about the same thing, basically about challenging the possibility of non-essentializing difference between sexes, right? So what they're saying is that there is that sex is given and there's men and women, and whatever challenges that is a problem. And both of those points come very much under the same logic. So I just want to push you to think further whether that's a possibility. And then I was wondering about education, and I guess Peter was going to come with that point too. So I wonder if the whole issue around transformation, which comes from education and has been a consistent point in the agenda of all of these governments, including Austria, would that not deserve a point of its own? So it's really just institute or intervening in this gender agenda by stopping transformation, by not allowing transformation happening through different modes of educating, gender studies programs, gender sensitive curricula in kindergartens, NGOs going in and doing sexual education, which is very much an issue in all of these 4 countries. So this is a very serious agenda and might deserve some more attention. So these are my comments.
Can I have one sentence?
Sure.
Education and culture deserve a separate paper. In the research we wrote with Bali, so I suggest to look at that.
Right.
But that doesn't take it out from here.
That's
And you were talking about sex education, right?
No, the gender study, that too. I did mention sex.
Transforming mentalities.
Yes.
With respect to
Culture,
gender.
That is interesting, because then I think we need to think about not just policies, but lack of policies. And as I was thinking through this is something that we could include, because Hungary is, so for example, if you think about Hungary, again, the changes, so some of the changes have to do with not going with the flow, not introducing the policies that could change things, and therefore then remaining static, or remaining in the past. So yeah, education is important, very important. Not so much gender studies courses, although symbolically that too, but the kind of education that I mean, the very first policy, of Fidesz was to eliminate gender-sensitive education from kindergartens, and that there's a reason why they thought that that was so important. So clearly, that should be there. Also, issues about violence. Apparently, in Poland, this is being switched back. So Tusk is trying to backtrack and get Poland, because Poland never actually walked out of the Istanbul Convention. They just initiated. They started to backtrack, and so again, there might be some changes there as well. But again, of course, you're right. That's part of the that's part of the story. That should be part of the story. That should be one of the points. One of the areas where policy making exists, and it would underscore the attention, so the conceptualization of women by these illiberal rulers as vulnerable and in need of support, but not in need of the kind of support that can be provided in a sort of in the way that the European Union or international organizations offer, but in a specific kind of support, our own kind of support, the kind of support that that's more sensible and that's more reasonable. So yeah, you're right. That should be there. I didn't have the Istanbul Convention there, but I genuinely thought that you'll be here, and maybe I shouldn't open my mouth about that issue. And lastly, I honestly, that's the honest truth. And finally, about the sexuality issue and the trans rights. I think I do think that they're different. So the idea that trans rights, I think, sort of maybe goes more with the concept of gender ideology. I mean, in a way, they're all connected, but sexuality and rights to non-heterosexual couples, to me, is slightly different than denying the fact that a gender is moldable and is fluid and changeable. They're connected. I agree. So maybe the connections is something that we should collectively think about more.
Thank you. So we'll jump to some online questions. So Zsolt Anili has two. I'll put them both together.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is, can we conclude that FPO became critical of market allocation and supporter of state redistribution? And the second question is from Zsolt. How has the relative wealth of men and women changed across the last decades?
Relative wealth.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Maybe start with the first one, the smaller one first.
Yeah. So yes, FPÖ did definitely take a great shift towards away from market towards more redistribution and more intervention into the market. Yes, absolutely. And both of the times when they were on par, they hold the position of welfare ministry, so they could actually, within the besides the greater coalition partner, they could act as, being the representative of pro-welfareism, as opposed to the primacy of the market forces. It is also important in the case of FPÖ how they talk about just the distribution and those who need protection, whom they overall address as the losers of globalization. So global capital, they talk critically about global or globalized capitalism and capitalism protection, just like actually many other far-right parties do. But at the same time, they don't want to really focus on the most vulnerable, but rather those who are, the petty bourgeoisie, or those who are working hard but still can't make ends meet. So yeah, but there, to put it shortly, yes, there has been a very definite shift in FPÖ's policies. The other question was the well-being of women or welfare
Well,
or the
this-
wealth.
this-
Wealth, relative wealth. So again, it's about
This is a
distribution.
question related to the impact of policies, which I didn't go into. But
Sure.
even if I knew what happened, of course I can speculate. They may not be connected to policies directly, because in both of these countries, both Italy and Austria, there has been a massive inflow of women into the labor market recently, in the past 2 decades, I would say. And that differentiates these two countries from Hungary and Poland, where women have been working full time. In these countries, and especially in Austria, this male breadwinner model is changing, and women are there on the labor market and increasing full time, which makes it quite likely that their wealth is increasing, even without social policy, without redistribution.
Okay, and then so there's one more. It's also about spending, so I'll share as well. This is from Kovesi. Was unofficial social spending, such as providing the marginalized groups with staple goods in politically important periods, included in the research?
What
Sorry, yeah. Was unofficial social spending?
unofficial social spending?
Yes, he puts it in quotes. Unofficial social spending. Maybe he's referring to the social policy by other means.
Okay.
Such as providing marginalized groups with staple goods in politically important periods included in this research.
All right, I see.
So
it's not
he gives. Yeah, okay, and so he gives some. I know about this explicitly from Hungary, but my assumption is that it's a common tactic in a performance-based SP system.
So it's like direct handouts around elections.
That seems to be right. Yes.
Yeah. Well, of course, that is not in manifestos, and it's not legal, so it's not in acts. It's not in policies. In the sense that what we scrutinized here are legislation and policies, and how policies are implemented.
Right.
But in some other research that I did, when we compared Turkey with Hungary, there we talked about these handouts to public workers in Hungary and also in Turkey when it comes to elections. So very direct promotion of people, and actually more generally, illiberal actors in power tend to carefully time their policies, their social policies, right before elections. Of course, that is true for democratic actors as well, but here there is much more connection between politics and policies and handouts, direct handouts to people.
Great, thank you. And then we can go back to our in-person attendees. Yes.
Well, I have a question that is going to be completely unfair because it's not something you address in your paper, but I'm wrestling with the issue. So, and I'm very much interested in your view on this. So, my problem is that we know exactly what are the illiberal right-wing parties are. On the basis we select, and you started with this criteria. We determine them, select them on the basis of political criteria. So, but if you look at, and if I look at your paper and I go through your paper and look at the actual policies they promote or they implement in the practice, I see a lot of policies that are not necessarily illiberal. A lot of them can be attributed to any mainstream centrist conservative parties. For example, merit pay is a classic conservative approach to think, or meritocratic policies based on meritocracy or merit performance, or another typical conservative approach to public policies is emphasizing choice and using the instruments like vouchers like this, or moral superiority. You mentioned it, a classical trait of conservative policies. So my question is that if you go, we turn the direction of the analysis, and how can you draw the line between typical centrist conservative policy patterns and typical illiberal far-right policy pattern? One answer might be what you put on the plate, that their relationship with gender issues might be an indication, but they're definitely not the only one. So my question is that, can you see any illiberal pattern emerging from the very concrete policies they incorporated in their manifestos or implemented when they got into power, or they just picking up conservative ideas and turn them upside, or so probably you see my question already.
Not easy, not easy. But I think if we wanted really to give an answer to this, we should also include non-illiberal actors into the analysis. So I mean, then we could compare, for instance, and that would be a way forward actually, to compare FPÖ's social policy program with the Volkspartei's in Austria. And even better would be to look into the details of the way they made the policies when on power. So which ideas were the common ideas, and which were the ones that were proposed and insisted on by FPÖ. But for instance, in this case, I would suggest that the explicit exclusion of people that reside in Austria, so people who have residency and are immigrants to the country, explicit exclusion of these people from social rights would be, I guess, a peculiar feature of the illiberal actor. In the same vein, the explicit exclusion of LGBTQ people from other rights, from also social rights in Hungary, like, for instance, from adoption. Even more than that, explicit exclusion of non-married couples from social rights in the 21st century would never be in the program, and would never be promoted or proposed by a moderate conservative actor who is not questioning the basics of liberal democracy, what I started my presentation with. That I don't think that would happen. So mainly we could go back to this politics issue. So when we see these anti-pluralist otherings and the negation of constitutional rights in social policies, there I would sense that there is illiberalism rather than conservatism. So that's
okay. I was thinking that in a lot of these countries where there are illiberal parties in power or close to power, are there at all moderate conservative parties around? Is it at all possible to have a moderate conservative political position?
With the exception of Hungary, there are.
Well, let me think about the US, for example.
But then, but it's a different case, because the entire Conservative Party, almost the entire Conservative Party became Trumpist.
Isn't that the direction where things are going?
And of course, this is a direction that changes in a lot of European countries, because
that's what I'm saying.
centrist conservative parties are competing with extreme right parties.
Yes.
therefore the taking up. But this is the reason why I'm asking you this question. So, what beyond the political criteria, what I completely agree and you're clear, and beyond these indicative policy issues, you mentioned just two, and you also mentioned gender and the relationship to gender equity or sex or whatever. But the real question is whether are we in the position already, after a lot of analysis on education policies, legal policies, social policies, gender policies, whatever, to come up with a construct of typical illiberal policy patterns that are distinct from illiberal, distinct from centrist conservative, traditional conservative policy patterns, because it may help us to.
That's not a really good idea.
It may help us to see better when a centrist conservative party is moving to the far right. From policy, in a policy perspective or policy point of view, public policy point of view. But I see that is.
Yeah, we are not yet there.
Okay.
We are not yet there, and this is why I started with emphasizing the role of discourse and procedures, how policies are made. That makes a difference, certainly. So the lack of transparent consultative mechanisms, and like in Maloney's case, so even in a liberal democracy, in Maloney's case, they just push through this new legislation by a decree. That decree that is there for, that type of decree is there for emergencies, so an emergency decree. This does make a difference. So there is, and in this sense, we can also say that some of the policies are really brave and innovative, I would even say, because they don't go through that negotiation process when these actors could be, challenged, or economists would put calculations on their tables and things like that, or propose some moderation of those policies, maybe moderation of the amount, like the case of Kaczynski shows with the 500 plus. All the economists and social policy arena in Poland was completely convinced that this is crazy, this is absolutely absurd, and it will ruin the treasury in Poland, and it did not. But I don't think that a moderate conservative party would have come up with such a drastic increase of family allowances in Poland ever. But this could be done with swiping away the normal pool of experts and consultative mechanisms.
You had a question.
Yeah, thanks. Really interesting. So my question is somewhat similar to the earlier one. So I was struck by one item, this early retirement for women, which I think is present in maybe 3 of the 4 cases, and Austria too, certainly the other 3.
Yes.
And this doesn't strike me as, I mean, it's interesting, but it doesn't strike me as distinctively liberal as a policy. Maybe I don't get the ideological motivation, but I was wondering whether this is something that is unique to illiberal right-wing actors, or are there such policies in other European or other countries? Or so I'm also looking for kind of, many of the things that you mentioned are common ground between conservative and the emphasis on LGBT is different. The emphasis on nativism is, I guess, well, I'm not so sure. Maybe the strong emphasis. So lots of common ground. I'm not entirely convinced that there's a distinctively liberal right Yeah, not yet, maybe future, yeah.
A very good question. Thank you. Early retirement for women. It really is a typical, I think it is a typical illiberal policy. It's a very good choice because it goes against the EU's directive on
Just shows my ignorance, yeah.
on unisex pension age.
Show your ignorance.
And that really is actually a liberal and work fairist idea. I mean, the unisex pension age.
Well, that is, yes.
That is promoting the employment of women. So the two genders should not be different in terms of employment, and should not be differentiated in terms of retirement age. Some would say this is a neoliberal idea, against which these actors actually dare to fight for this differentiation of women, so that they can care for the grandchildren. In all the three countries, this is reasoned by the care obligations of women, or care duties, or that they like to care. But let me tell you an interesting thing, and that is the stance of the ILO, the International Labour Organization, on early retirement of women. They are for the early retirement of women, and they treat it, or they think about it as an equalizing measure, actually, just like other I was just quickly to say preferential treatment of disadvantaged groups in various areas, like a quota for women in parliament. So it could equally be a leftist idea.
As under state socialism.
Yeah, that was my.
Yeah.
But at the same time, so women could retire in Hungary after 40 years of work. There's no care, like, and the number of children, or there's none of that.
Yes, that is included.
So this is a care fair. So
now
basically,
it
you're
is
getting
8 years are included as like full-time work, 8 years of care
for children. So women can make claims on the state on the basis of care, having done care.
Not necessarily a illiberal idea, right?
It's a second wave feminist proposal, or it was. I mean, not interesting. So it's interesting. It's not the policies themselves. Maybe it's the process that Zorka talks about, or maybe it's the context in which they take shape. Because clearly, when second wave feminists promoted the valuation of care work, women's care work, that's not what they meant. They did not mean to thrust women into poverty because they retire early, or they did not mean to double women's, work and further. They didn't mean that women then should become carers of their grandchildren, so etc. But it certainly is the same in its shape.
Maybe something similar will come out of all this as what we propose related to populist policy making and populism and governance, and that is not that the individual policies themselves would not seem to be populist, but if you take them together, then you may find an idea behind it, or ideas behind it that differ from non-illiberal actors. But I'm not sure, we are really not yet there.
So I hear you saying that it's not the elements of the actual policies that leads to to a construct of illiberal policies, but rather the construct of the underlying purposes and discourses that shape the selection among policy instruments. That's what you're suggesting?
Not quite.
No.
No.
There's something about the confluence of these policies that create a situation that helps legitimate that strengthens the state, which is important in illiberal regimes, and creates political legitimacy that overrides issues related to, so that creates a kind of political legitimacy for authoritarian or authoritarianizing rulers that is more important for people than equality and rights and separation of the state and church, etc.
Okay, so that
confluence.
populism as a kind of distinctive criteria of illiberal policy. Am I right?
We're coming this up as we go along. I don't know. I don't know, but it's a good question. There's something, I mean, there's something about them that is truly disturbing, and there are similarities across these countries. But what exactly are those similarities that makes them? Not only that, I mean, we can grab the similarities. We can't quite identify how the distinctiveness from other regimes. But I mean, think about so just if you think about Lex CEU, again, that is the piece of so every element of the new higher education law that kicked CEU out of this country exists somewhere in some part of the world, not that far away. The fact that you have to, in order to be a foreign university, you have to teach in this other country, that you have to have an agreement, that all of these. If you put them together, they're still producing a situation in which sort of
CEU can be
that you can target certain universities that that you deem dangerous for your ideological or political rule. And of course, the legislation is passed in a process in an emergency. So the process also is done. And so it's not the actual legislation itself, it's somehow the confluence of the bits and pieces. But I don't know how. Somebody should create a map or a visualization.
If I may just add that my big table that I rushed through is something like this. I mean, it puts all that together, and it maybe we could also throw it with certain colors. What are the striking commonalities of these actors? And the paper will be available within 2 weeks for the audience as a working paper. So on the website of AUTHLIB, together with a blog that I'm just writing. So, but this discussion and your questions helped a lot to develop that blog too, and that paper.
Great, thank you, Dorota. Do you want to say any kind of final remarks? Great, thank you so much, Eva. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for a wonderful presentation and a very illuminating conversation. So thank you.